Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Lablonde Kalalizi and I'm very happy to have you here today. This is the good decision that you have taken to follow this course today. Are you one of those people who always ask yourself the difference between a web designer and a web developer? If you are the one, then you are at the right place. You have made an amazing decision to start this course today. And throughout the course, I'm going to answer all your questions. So let's get started. What is the difference between a web designer and a web developer? In this course, what are you going to learn? What are you expecting to learn in this course? You are going to learn the difference between a web designer and a web developer. So, who is a web designer? Common skills and tools that you need to become a web designer, specific jobs for web designers, starting your journey. How would you have to start your journey as a web developer? And how do you become a front end developer? Who is a front end developer and how you can become a front end developer? I'm going to explain to you the general skills that you need to become a web developer and the design tools that you can use to start practicing today if you want to become a professional designer. I'm going to explain to you the difference between a back-end developer and a front-end developer and the use of databases. I'm going to help you to understand the basic hosting knowledge that you need to know as a web developer and the salary differences between a web developer and a designer. So, how wonderful is that? I hope you have an amazing expectations after all of those that I have told you what you are going to learn in this course because it's just amazing. You have to take your pen, you have to take a notebook. If you want to become a programmer, you have to know where to start, what tools to use, what languages to start learning today, and what you need in order to become a professional web developer. And if you are the one who actually want to become a web designer, but you don't know where to start, what to start learning, so this is the opportunity. I am going to explain to you all the tools that you need to start learning today to become a web designer and the difference in salaries that you might expect as a beginner, even when you have experience. So this will not just be a fixed salary, but this is just an estimation because the salary depends on the countries that you are in. And actually, you are going to learn a lot more in this course. So let's start now, and you have to pay a careful attention as I take you throughout this course. A web designer governs everything involved with the visual aesthetic and usability of a website. This might include color scheme, layout, information flow, and everything else related to the visual aspect of the UI/UX designers. UI means user interface and UX means user experience. A web designer builds a layout that are usually pleasing for visitors. So, what are the common skills and tools that distinguish a web designer from a web developer? If you have started your journey today, can you tell me which tools are you actually using? Do you call yourself a web designer or you call yourself a web developer? So, I am going to tell you which skills and which tools web designers use on a daily basis and which tools you can start practicing or you should start using as a web developer. So now you have to understand that as a web designer, you actually have to know how to use Adobe Creatives or Sketch to build final layouts, design, or the website. So tell me if you actually use WordPress on a daily basis, or you actually design with Wix or other web website builders. So are you actually a web designer or you are a web developer? Basically, you are a web designer because a web developer actually use code, use programming languages to design, not to design, but to build a website. A web designer build layouts, mock-ups, and a lot more, but a web developer is a programmer. I am going to take you through all of those things as we go throughout this course. So, common skills and tools that distinguish a web designer from the web developer. As a web designer, you must be able to know how to create or how to design logos. You must be a graphic designer. If you are actually a web if you are a web designer, you must also be a graphic designer. You must be able to know how to design like content, business content, brands, business brands, online content, and many more, because that is actually a job of a graphic designer. You must be able to design layouts, formats, placing call to action buttons. You must be able to build branding, as I just said, and wireframes, mockups, and storyboards. You must be able to know how to design the color palettes and how to design typography. That is actually a job of a web designer. A web design is concerned with what the user actually sees on their screen or mobile devices, and less so about the mechanism beneath the surface that make it all work through the use of color, images, typography, and layout. So a web designer designs the mockups, the layout of a website, and give those layouts or those mockups to a developer to make functionalities, to start coding that website, to start coding those mockups to bring them to life. It's just like an architecture and a builder. Before you start building your house, you have to go first to an architect. You give your architect a plan. What do you want your house to look like? And then your architect is going to make a plan of your house for you. Same thing like a web designer. Uh, a web designer design the mockups, the layout of a website, and a web developer start coding or program that layout into a website with full functionalities. So what are the specific jobs for web designers? As a web designer, today you have started your journey as a web designer. So, what jobs can you apply for if you want to work in the industry or in a company or anywhere else? So, as a web designer, you should apply for a UI designer job. What does the UI designers do? They deal with user interactions. So all those interactions that you see on the website, those actually are the work of the UI designers. Or you can apply for a UX designers. These are the user experience designers. As just the word has stated it, you have understood what it means. They are behind the experience that keeps your visitors engaged on your website. So beside UI or UX, you can also apply for a web designer's job. So this is actually the visibility of the website on the web wide on the website. So as a web designer, you build interfaces that are pleasing and convenient to use. So they combine both creativity and programming. This is where I said you can use actually Wix or you can use WordPress. By designing layouts, you can also use Photoshop, you can use Figma, you can use Sketch, and many more softwares. So you can also apply for a graphic designer job. These graphic designers, they create brands, content, and online content for marketing. So it depends on what you want to do and what you are specializing in as a web designer, but it's actually recommended to learn all of this so that uh, you must be looked for. So now I hope you have understood the basics of a web designer. Now you can be able to answer your question whether you are a web designer or you are a web developer. And if today you want to start your journey, now you understand where you can start, whether you want to become a web designer or whether you want to become a web developer. Now I'm going to take you through the difference of a web developer, how to start your journey as a web developer, and what do you need in order to become a web developer. So I hope you have understood the starting point of a web designer, and I will still go to explain to you the tools that you must be learning, that you must start learning today if you want to become a professional web designer. And if you have started your journey already and you want to improve, you want to, maybe you are aiming for a higher salary. So now I will also explain to you what you can start using today, because everything starts with one step, and that step is actually taking a decision. And today, I hope if you have confusions on the differences between a web designer and a web developer, all those confusions are going to be cleared, and I hope that is the reason why you chose to watch this course or you chose to watch this video. So let me take you to the procedures on how you can become a web developer. A web developer is a programmer who specializes in the World Wide Web development programming languages to develop applications. Web development governs all the code that makes a website tick. It can be split into two categories. So, who can tell me which categories do you know for a web developer? So, there is two categories. Once you start your journey as a web developer, you might want to learn whether you want to 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 program or to code the user. You want to start coding on the front end development, what a user is able to see, or you want to involve yourself with databases or server side, which is actually a back end development. So these are the two categories of a web developer: front end developer and a back end developer. And I am going actually to explain to you the difference between the two. But before we go there, I am going to tell you uh, the journey of a web developer. As a web developer, you can build a user interface using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. These are the basics, these are the backbones of a web development journey. So you have to know how to use HTML, you have to know how to use CSS, and how to code with JavaScript, because these are the basics of a web development journey, and is a compulsory thing that you have to learn these three things: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, if you want to become a professional web developer. And once you memorize all these three, now you can start calling yourself a web developer. And beside that, a web developer also use visioning tools to keep a history of the previous builds quickly and effortlessly. Move back to a previous version. I hope you understand that. And who is a front-end developers? Who are front-end developers? Front-end developers can use styling processors, JavaScript libraries, and frameworks to fasten development. A front-end developer provides the markup design to back-end developers. to implement a dynamic website. So backend developers create the backbone of the website using languages such as PHP, Python. Uh, you can also use C Sharp, and if you are a Java programmer, you are also a backend developer because you actually use the server side and you deal with database. So backend development is a backbone of a website. You deal with what is behind the scene of what a user can see. So I might not say that that is the difficult thing of or a web development, but actually it depends on you whether you want to become a front end developer or a back end developer. But before you become a back end developer, I will advise everyone to start learning the front end development thing first. uh, you have to learn the three basic skills is that I told you: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Because once you memorize that, now you can go to the libraries and frameworks, and it will be easier for you to start learning the databases and the server side of the websites. So, how to become a front end a front end developer? How to start your journey as a front end developer? So, who is a front end developer? As I said, front end development is a client side of an application. It's the code responsible for determining how the website will actually display the designs mocked up by the designer. So it is a front-end developer's job that tends to share the most overlap with the web designer. Front-end developers don't create mockups, so they don't select typography or pick up color palettes. All these are usually provided by the designers. So the front-end developers, they turn those mockups into a working website that has functionalities, as you can see on these screens here on the laptops or on the desktop. So the front end developer code what a client is able to see on the screen, the visibility. So these were like designs that were made by the designers, and they gave a front end developer the designs to turn it into a website that is fully coded. So now you have to tell me, the question is, which career is for you? Are you a front end developer? Are you a web designer? Or you want to tell me you are a back end developer? I haven't finished yet on the skills that you need to learn if you want to become a front end developer. I want to break it down for you so that you must know today. Okay, if today I'm going to apply a job to an industry or to a company, what job should I apply for? Should I apply for a web designer jobs? Should I apply for a front end developer jobs? Or should I apply for a back end developer's jobs? So now you have to understand this. When you start your journey as a front end developer, which skills do you need to learn first? So these are the common skills you need if you want to become a front-end developer. First, you have to learn HTML, as I said. Next, you have to learn CSS, and then you have to know how to code with JavaScript. Once you memorize those three, now you can go and start learning the frameworks, which are Angular, React.js, Vue, Ember, and then you can go and start learning the libraries. Of course, it's compulsory for a web developer to know how to use Git and GitHub. So those actually are the basics knowledge that you need to learn if you want to become a front-end developer. Every journey starts with the first step. Therefore, it is essential to start in the right direction and build solid foundation from the beginning. So, general skills to become a web developer, as I have said. So, you can whether become a front end developer or a back end developer. But what if you want to become all of them? So it's actually a unicorn. You are a unicorn because you want to become both a front-end developer and a back-end developer. That person is actually called a full stack developer. If you ever heard of a full stack developer, those are the people who actually code the front end side and a back end side. You are familiar with the client side of the application, and you are familiar with the server side of the application, and you are familiar with the database as well of the application. So, if you want to become that person, which skills do you need to know? Which skills do you need to learn starting from today? Or if you have started your journey, what other skills you need to improve? So, these are the skills, general skills to become a web developer. As I said, the backbones of these web applications are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Every application you're gonna see on the web contains HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So you have to know which tools to use in order to start coding. So you have to also learn the Git, the code versions of Git. Basic graphic designer, even though you are not a graphic designer, you have to know the tools or the basics of a graphic designing. You have to know the difference between backend and the database, working with hosting, publishing your website. Of course, as a web developer, you don't want to program your applications, but you don't know how to put them on the web. So, this is the reason why I'm going to give you the basic skills on what skills you need in order to publish your website, or the hosting skills that you need. So the libraries and frameworks as well that you can learn as a web developer. So what is HTML? I've been talking about HTML, but you're actually asking yourself, what is HTML and how to learn HTML and what do I need in HTML? So here it is. HTML is actually a hypertext markup language, is a markup language, not a programming language. And for you to learn HTML, you need to know at least top 10 HTML tags. Example link. I'm not going to explain uh, everything in HTML, but these are the basics that you might need to learn as you learn HTML. You must understand the basic structure of HTML documents. You must know the basic search engine optimization, called SEO in abbreviation. You must know the correlation between files. What do I mean by correlation? How to connect CSS file, JavaScript file, and images with your HTML file, and how to use resources. What is URL? Understand the relationship between tags. So I hope you have understood uh, the basics that you should start searching for once you embark yourself in a web development journey. And once you start learning HTML, I hope you have understood what you can start focusing on as you learn HTML. And now, after you have learned HTML, what should you do next? So after learning HTML, you have to learn CSS. So what is CSS? CSS is a cascading styling sheet, and you have to know how to style your application, knowing how to use and when to use CSS properties. What I'm talking about properties, they're actually borders, text formatting, font colors, and many more. So you have to know how to use CSS selectors, CSS classes selectors, using multiple sectors, and inserting CSS in an HTML document, and on the external and internal side. So if you are a web developer, you are coding your application. Of course, you're not just gonna leave it with uh, an HTML code. No, you actually have to include CSS. You have to style your application. that is how your application looks beautiful. If you see all those colors, the fonts, all those things on the web is actually thanks to CSS, because CSS can do your applications the way you want it to be. You want to make it the way you want it to look. So that is actually the work of CSS. So after you have learned HTML, CSS, now you have to start learning JavaScript. JavaScript is a programming language for the web. So you have to understand, once you start researching courses for JavaScript or you want to learn JavaScript, I know it's really difficult to learn everything at the same time, but what should you start learning? At least know the basic data types, which are number, string, object. You have to know the variables, data structure, which are arrays and JSON. Functions, conditional statements, loops, interactions with a user, events, manipulating a DOM, basic usage of JavaScript knowledge, and object-oriented programming. So now, what tools do you use? Which tools are you using as a web developer? I know everyone has their own tools that they might be using to program your applications. Even myself, I have my own favorite tool that I use on a daily basis. But I'm going to tell you what kind of tools you can look on Google to start to download and start coding today. So as a web developer, you can use Visual Studio Code, called as well VS Code. That is actually a popular software, a popular text editor that is mostly used by many developers, VS Code. So that is my favorite as well. I use VS Code for programming. Actually, you can either download the IDE software, Visual Studio. This one you can actually code all the languages in it, but it's a heavy software and it needs a lot of space in your laptop. So after Visual, if you don't want to code the Visual Studio, you can also use Notepad++. You can whether download Sublime Text, Eclipse, or Atom, and many more. There is a lot of text editors that you can download, but these are the most used. These are the popular ones that I know as well. And you can select one of these ones and start programming today. So what are the design tools? So these tools, you can learn them whether you are a web developer or you are a web designer. So these are like Photoshop, Figma, Zeppelin, Sketch, InVision, Paint, uh, Paint.net comes in Windows and Preview if you are using a Mac laptop. So you use Canva for small edits online. So if you are a graphic designer, you must know all these softwares. And if you are a web developer, I advise you to learn at least one or two so that you can understand the designer language. And as a designer, also must know at least the basics of programming languages such as HTML, CSS, and JavaScript so that you can understand the programmer's language, because you will have to communicate the two of you. Once you design, you have to give a developer to code. Once you are coding, you have to seek explanations from a designer. And if you are not able to understand each other's language, it will become a complications. And that is a reason why it's always recommended for a web developer to know how to design and for a web designer to learn at least the basics of programming. So what do I mean by Git code versioning? So you have to learn the basic code versioning knowledge needed. What are the knowledge that are needed in Git? So Code versioning or version control enables you to track and controls, but also revise your changes to your programming code. So what do you have to know? You have to know how to commit code on GitHub, sharing your code with others, restoring code to the previous version. You have to know what is a branch and what is a tag, how to merge code, knowing what is code review. So now I have said that I am actually going to let you know actually the difference between a back-end developer and a front-end developer. Now we have reached on the back-end development and the database knowledge that you have to learn if you want to become a back-end developer. So as a back-end developer, back-end development makes you learn what is happening behind the scene of what a user can see. So data is stored, manipulated, and retrieved from a database. So these days we frequently use cloud systems like Azure or Amazon Web Services to store these databases. You can learn how to manage data in the database by using languages such as SQL, structured query language, or NoSQL, and this can be MongoDB, Firebase, or others. So as a back-end developer, you also have to learn how to build JavaScript apps outside the browser using popular platforms like Node.js. This will help you to create more dynamic web pages. So what are the skills that you need as a back-end developer? You actually have to familiarize yourself with cloud like Amazon Web Services or Azure. It depends on which one you want to learn. You can learn how to use SQL, NoSQL, Node.js, JSON, or API. So this actually it will be when now you have learned the beginning, the at least the beginner side of a programming language like JavaScript, and now you want to specialize in all the server side and the cloud. How does it work? So this is the skills that you need to start learning today if you want to become a back-end developer or if you want to become a full stack developer. So what are the basic web hosting knowledge that you need? As I said, if you are a web developer, of course, you have to know how to publish your website. You have to know what is hosting, how to host your web applications. So, what do you actually have to understand? You have to know what is a URL, what is a domain name or a subdomain, and you have to know what is IP and IP, what is routing, basic FTP knowledge or other tools for publishing code to a server, how to refresh your page, how to do it without interruptions, the database migrations and upgrades, basics of optimizations, making resources smaller, and the basics of a server health analytics. So those are the things that you have to start learning if you want to know what is how to host your application. Of course, you're not going to host your application if you don't know what is a URL. You're not going to put your application online if you don't have a domain name. So you have to understand all those stuff. What is a domain name? What is a subdomain name? How to refresh your page once your page is already on the web without interruptions or making any error in your website. So I hope you have understood the basics of this course, what I went through. Throughout this course, you have understood the difference between a web designer and a web developer. You have understood the skills that you have to start learning today if you want to become a web developer as a front end or a back end. And if you want to learn the general skills to become a full stack developer, I have explained all those skills for you. I've even told you the tools that you can start using today in order to start your journey as a web developer, or you have to start your journey as a web designer. So these are the most important things that you have to start learning today, and I hope you have learned a lot throughout. The salary differences between a web developer and a web designer. As a beginner, you just finished learning and you are a web developer. You can expect $40,000 a year annually salary. If you have an experience like 2 years or 3 years experience, your average might be in like 59,000, and the highly salary can come along 86,000 rand. So this salary differences is not a fixed amount. This can differ from country to country or locations and industries within the countries. So it depends with your location, it depends with the industry that you are working in, it depends with your country. So these are just the estimation salaries that are given in USA, and these were for 2020. So you can search more about the salary differences between a web developer and a web designer. And if you are a web designer, you have a little bit your salary is a little bit below the web developer salary. As you can see, the beginner you can expect like $35,000 annually salary. On average of 2 or 3 years, you can expect $50,000, and on the highest salary, you can expect 74,000. So these actually are just an estimations, and if you want to know more about the salary differences between a web designer and a web developer, I can advise you to go on Google and search more about the salary differences, and that will also depend on which career you are following, which career you actually uh, undergoing in. So start learning today. Nothing is impossible, nothing is difficult. The same thing as nothing is easy. You just have to take one step, and you have to commit as far as you learn and be disciplined in your learning, because things that others can do in a year, you can do it in 3 months, 6 months, because people are different. And after 6 months, after a year, you can start making money of your knowledge. You can even use your knowledge to start making money online with your skills without even working for an industry. So I wish you all the best. You have to take a decision today, and if you actually have started your career in one of these career choices, I wish you all the best. Thank you.